Hello again, this is Tim Lloyd from GMAT.cz, part of Gain Access. We're in Prague in the Czech Republic, and spring is coming, beautiful time of year. Right, this is another question from the legendary Sandeep Gupta's quantitative 700 plus selection, which can be found online. This is Quant Topic 3, question 46. Now, the first thing you're going to realize about this question is it's a lot more difficult than it looks, and anyone who is watching this video who is not regularly scoring above 600 in practice tests, I would advise you to watch it, but perhaps come back later, because there are certain assumptions that we make with regard to the speed of calculation, the speed of thought, and the ability to see what's really going on behind questions of this type. Okay, first of all, you can obviously see this is a yes/no question, not a value question. The question is the absolute value of n less than 1? So as we teach all our students here, let's go to the board and let's think about step 1, which is reasoning through the question stem. I'd say the absolute biggest mistake students make until they learn their lesson is they rush through this stage. They don't look at the question stem and think, okay, what does that really mean in terms of data sufficiency, in this case in terms of number properties? Well, what it really means is when we go inside that absolute value, okay, what are we going to get? Are we going to get integers? Are we going to get 0? Are we going to get fractions? Okay, now this is a fairly difficult question, but again, you don't have to actually look at all the possible cases. So even though there might be other cases and people will perhaps email me talking about something I've missed, as long as I get to yes/no as quickly as possible, I've done my job properly as a test taker. And the first question we should really ask ourselves here is n a plus minus fraction? Think about this. Now, I like to use numbers, and as you can see, I like to pick, when I'm dealing with plus minus fractions, the value half, plus minus half. So if you're not sure about that, just pause the video and think about the reasoning. Okay, as already stated, this is a yes/no data sufficiency question. If we have sufficient data to answer this question, once we've looked at the additional information in additional statements 1 and 2, then to get a yes, we will know for sure, without doubt, that n is definitely either not or is a plus minus fraction always. What I mean by that is a yes with regard to sufficiency doesn't necessarily mean you get a yes to the question. In other words, if we know for sure that no, n is never going to be a plus minus fraction, or the absolute value of n is never going to be less than 1, and don't forget we might need to use 0, but in this case we actually don't, as you'll see, or we choose not to, that's a yes. However, if we sometimes get the condition that n is indeed a plus minus fraction and then sometimes it's not, for example it could be a positive negative integer, then that's a no, and that would therefore be insufficient. Okay, so we are pretty much now in control of the question stem. We understand what sufficiency is or isn't with regard to what limits we have of the variable. Let's now look at variables, Let's now look at the first additional statement. Now, immediately you have a choice to make, and that's what GMAT data sufficiency is all about, and that's what GMAT's all about: making good decisions, making good choices. And in fact, sometimes making no choice at all is the wrong decision. Okay, questions are written for us as test takers to find the elegant method to unlock the most effective, the quickest, the smartest way to get to the right answer. Okay, let's have some fun. So if we say let x be 1, that's impossible. GMAT does not have that kind of situation where n is less than n. So we're going to go up a step. We're going to choose another integer value for x because we want to make our lives easy. We'll say let x equal 2. Hence, of course, whatever value we then choose for n according to the structure of the question stem and according to the limit set by the additional information in statement 1, that value that we choose for n will be squared. So straight away you should be thinking, okay, what do I know with regard to number properties and squares? Okay, positive, negative values, etc. But let's just go step by step and not run away with ourselves. And we have, for example, let n equal 2. Okay, so 2 squared and then 2. Well, you don't have to be a genius to know that that's not an option, because it's absolutely sure that 4 is not less than 2. Let's go in another direction and let's go down a bit. Let's say n is 1. Well, 1 squared is not less than 1. And as you can see, we're just slowly knocking off options here. We're reducing the possible value of n with regard to choosing a value of x of 2. Let's now do negative integers. Any negative integer squared becomes positive, so quickly you may have already done that. I'm just going through this in a painstaking manner so that anyone who's not sure of this system can see, right, okay, yeah, no, hold on. We are in a situation here where we've eliminated positive and negative integers, 1 and minus 1. Let's try fractions when x is a square. X is 2. Well, in this case, immediately we're in the right zone. We know that half squared is a quarter, and a half is absolutely greater than a quarter. So we have our first condition, which gives us what we're looking for. Now, we haven't been cheating, we haven't been doing any magic here at all, no high-end math. We're just methodologically going through a set of numbers that we can pick to actually decide whether or not the information given is sufficient to answer the question as to whether n must be a positive or negative fraction. Okay, now in the second case we then tried a negative fraction, and as we already know, whenever you square a negative you get a positive. So from this first set of values that we've picked, where x is 2, the only case this will be true is when n is a positive fraction. And I'm not going to bother with 0 because we don't need to go there. Okay, we've looked at x is 1, we've looked at x is 2 with the required cases according to the limits set up by the question stem and the additional information in statement 1. We're now going to look at where x is 3. The reason being there are different number property situations when we use odd and even values. Okay, so as already stated, we're going to let x now equal 3 for our next case. If we start with n is a half, n cubed is 1/8, and 1/8 is less than a half, so we can give a half a double tick, not that we needed to. Let's do a negative fraction now. Stay systematic, we'll work inwards outwards this time. Minus a half raised to the power 3 is still negative, but it's only 1/8, which makes it actually greater than negative half because the denominator is greater in a negative. That makes it a larger value. Now we're going to try n is minus 2. We'll use those values from before, and that then gives us minus 8, and that, interestingly, immediately is where we can stop, because as soon as we know that we can use an integer, okay, and stay within the condition of statement 2, we now have a yes and a no to the original question of whether or not n, okay, of whether n should be a plus or minus fraction only. We can therefore eliminate answer choices A and D. And as I said before, if you're not sure why we just made those process steps in a data sufficiency question of eliminating A and D, then again go back, watch this video again later and review some slightly easier questions, and come back when you feel more confident. Okay, so we're now going to move on to the second clue by itself. Okay, well, interestingly, in this question the hard work's already been done. This is not a super advanced question by any means, because this second clue is absolutely very easy to eliminate in regards to sufficiency. There's not much we need to do in terms of deduction or thinking. One thing's for sure, we know that x to the power minus 1, if it equals minus 2, therefore x itself would be minus a half. Problem is with that is absolutely no information given regarding n, okay, and that's the key variable, or one of the key variables from the question. So we can now say, okay, with regard to whether we can say is n a plus or minus fraction, In other words, is the absolute power of n, sorry, the absolute value of n less than 1? We haven't got enough information, so we have to put the clues together so we can eliminate answer choice B. Now, when we put the clues together, the statements together, well, what does that tell us? Well, let's have a look. We know that n to the power x is less than n. That's an absolute limit set up from statement 1. We also know that x is negative half. That's an absolute fact given to us by statement 2. Now, because we did quite a lot of legwork in that with the first statement, first of all, the system should be fresh in your mind, but also the actual result of plugging in certain values should be very quick. So let's start systematically. X is of course negative half, not half. Be careful not to make that mistake, although actually in this question that wouldn't matter, interestingly enough. So we'll say, let's try positive integer. We'll go with n is 2. Now remember, we're dealing in terms of yes or no. If we find yes and no, the answer is E. But if we only find no or we only find yes, the answer is C. And what that means is, we're told, we now know that if n is an integer, which is greater than 1, or a value greater than 1, in other words 2 is an easy one to use, we get a yes. But in terms of the actual question stem, we get a no. In other words, no, n is not a positive or negative fraction. We tried a negative 2 as well, you saw there, but you can't take a square root of a negative number. So we'll now do the fraction, positive, and the square root of 2 is the result, because if n is a half raised to the power minus half, we actually get the reciprocal of the first one. In fact, we very quickly now have got to the point, because we can't take roots of negatives, that there is only one situation, obeying all the limits set up by the statements, where the absolute value of n will in no way be a positive or negative fraction. Okay, we get a no to that. Run through all those cases again if you need to, but because we've established that within the limits of the statements and the question stem that n will in fact be greater than 1, if you feel like plugging in more than one value, go for it. But mathematically we can then say no, not possible. The answer is no, and because it's always no, that's sufficient. In data sufficiency, to a yes-no question, if you can establish beyond doubt, and I'm talking in GMAT world, that means preferably within 2 minutes or approximately 2 minutes on such a high level question, the answer is C, and that's what we've got here. We eliminate E because it's always no. Thank you very much. This is Tim Lloyd from GMAT.cz, part of Gain Access in Prague in the beautiful Czech Republic. And once again, a huge show of appreciation to Mr. Sandeep Gupta, the author of these incredible 700 plus level quant questions. And there'll be more from these questions and others on our YouTube channel. Feel free to contact us in any way that suits you, and if you've got any questions regarding this or other parts of our service, we look forward to hearing from you soon. Goodbye.